Okay, we're talking about the effects of academic stress on illness and injury in Division I football. So what was this study? Well, this study was retrospective. Whenever you get down to it, we didn't start out with anything in mind. We weren't tracking things specifically for the injuries, etc. We just happened to see a rash of injuries this year and wanted to see if we could figure out why, because fingers were being pointed. Everything that we could think of was fruitless. We'd read the studies about the FMS. We'd read the studies about asymmetries through the FMS. We looked at changes in body weight, changes in strength, changes in body composition, and everything that we did, we couldn't figure out what was going on. So we did not know why these injuries were happening, and we decided we need to get to the bottom of it. So we couldn't figure out what was going on. Then one night, we were having a rough season, and I went out and had drinks with two neurologists, a cardiac surgeon, and a neuroscientist, and me being a strength coach. We had several drinks, and they were talking about with some of their patients with Alzheimer's that they had some almost like a circadian rhythm of declination, and that the date, the number of weeks, they could almost time what was going to happen next. So then I thought, what happens if I go back and I run date? Well, this is what we saw, that there were some clear spikes of when injuries occurred. If there was no relationship to some sort of stress, you would just expect it to all be about the same number of new injuries per week. And that's not what we saw. Why were the peaks there when they were? Well, it was stress, just plainly and simply. Outside of training camp, the athlete was habituated to the demands of their sport. They've played football for at least 6 years for the most of them, and then up to 10 years for the people that were redshirt seniors. They knew the demands of the sport because they dealt with it week in, week out, year after year. They were used to it, but they were not habituated to the demands of the academic stress because it occurred so infrequently. Whenever tests came about, stress levels increased. It wasn't something that they were used to. So if we look at the general adaptation syndrome, we know that, hey, you're coming along, there's a stressor that occurs, you start to, you're hitting the alarm phase, oh my gosh, you drop down. Then you hit this resistance phase, and then you hit the exhaustion. The resistance phase, whenever you get whenever you get used to it, but it can only last for so long. Our system responds to defends, and then it fatigues. Now, we got to remember that our autonomic nervous system has got two branches. We've got the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. Pardon my typo here with the 5 F's. There's 4: fight, flight, fear, fornication. With the sympathetic engagement, we see the pupils dilate. We have a inhibitory effect for the flow of saliva. The heartbeat goes faster. The bronchioles dilate. The digestion, so the peristalsis and secretion stops. We have a conversion of glycogen to glucose so that our blood sugar is increased, that we've got the energy to call upon. We've got the secretion of adrenaline and noradrenaline. Those catecholamines just start racing through to be able to run faster, jump higher, lift more. Inhibits the bladder contraction, and sometimes it will just void altogether the bowels so that you don't have much to hold on to. Then we've got the parasympathetic side of it, and which is the one that's commonly called rest and digest. So we see that our pupils come back to normal. We stimulate the flow of saliva, heartbeat slows, our bronchioles constrict because not as much oxygen needs to be exchanged with carbon dioxide. Digestion kicks back up, so the liver quits converting glycogen to glucose, and it starts secreting bile, to be able to aid with digestion, and the bladder starts working again. So, the vagus nerve is in charge of most of this, and of the autonomic nervous system, and That's what's going on there. So if we look at the stress response system, what we see goes into our brain, hits the HPA axis, comes down. All of our the hormones are released: cortisol, epinephrine, norepinephrine, etc. And it's the cyclical process to where it's either being upregulated or downregulated. So we followed the team throughout the course of the entire season. And again, here's the histogram of that. You can see at the start was training camp, and then we'll see some spikes that we'll get into a little bit more. But what were the peaks? Now, whenever I saw the peaks, I knew that we were dealing with something. And I knew, based off of my syllabus, that it happened to coincide with the peaks because I was also teaching classes at the time. So I went to the academic coordinators and confirmed that peaks were during test weeks or project weeks, academically stressful weeks. So I also ended up enlisting the help of a health psychologist who had a background in football, who was a college football player. And he's like, oh, hey, dude, you're talking about psychoneuroimmunology. So that allowed us to go and really start examining this more in depth. Now, we have to remember that additional stress was the causing factor. So remember, stress is a syndrome. It doesn't matter what the input is. It doesn't matter if it is sport, if it's, what. But we know that there was a specific output. Okay? So we have that the HPA axis being activated like we just talked about. Now, if we look at the frequency of injuries by the type of week, this is what Jan Lemure grabbed a hold of. That during training camp, we had a lot of injuries. During high academic stress, we had a significant amount, but smaller. In the low academic stress week, we had the fewest. We can see that it's more than double during high academic stress week as compared to low academic stress. So, hey, we're dealing with something. And also during training camp, this is before rule changes with the NCAA, that we had multiple, we would have multiple padded practices a day. But if we look at this, this kind of explains things very, very well for this accumulation of stress. This paper by Tinda Szivak and Dr. William Kraemer, and it's the Physiological Readiness and Resilience, pillars of military preparedness. Now, some people always question, why are you using military in this whenever you're talking about sport? Well, who is subjected to more stress than the military? And also, let's think about this. How many times in sport do you hear people talking about that they're soldiers and everything else? So this is something that they understand. The physiological stress response is a temporary phenomenon which acts to prepare the neuroendocrine, muscular, skeletal, and cardiovascular systems to respond appropriately to a stressful event, so that our hormones, our muscles, and our cardiovascular system are ready to upregulate the oxygen, be able to have the all the neurotransmitters on call, and our muscles primed to be able to lift heavy, run fast, and run forever. Through activation of the HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the glucocorticoids or cortisol are synthesized and secreted at a higher rate from the adrenal cortex. Simultaneously, the sympathetic nervous system activation results in increased secretion of the catecholamines, of epinephrine and norepinephrine from the adrenal medulla. Under normal circumstances, normal healthy circumstances, the stressful signal terminates, and through a negative feedback mechanism, glucocorticoid secretion drops. Stimulation of the HPA axis decreases, while simultaneously the sympathetic nervous system activity and catecholamine secretion decreases and homeostasis is restored. So what this is saying is that in normal, healthy circumstances, you have your stressor, everything goes off. And then whenever you no longer have your stressor, everything goes back to normal. So it's kind of like the book by Robert Sapolsky, Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, is that whenever the lion was chasing them, everything was upregulated. They ran. If they didn't get caught and they got away from the lion, there was no stress. They went back immediately to eating, drinking water, etc., having a good old zebra time. Now, they also go on in this paper to say that it's not just the one stressful incident, but the accumulation of stressful incidents that leads to injury or illness in this population. Now, what about the additional stressors, additional beyond sport? Thoughts of some of the reviewers had said, hey, what about these high and low velocity impacts? The linemen, they're not hitting from a running start. They're just coming from a couple inches, so that shouldn't have anything. And what about the linebackers, et cetera? Well, in our data, now that's not saying that there's not a possibility that we didn't just have some error in here because of it just being one team, but there was no effect in our data of positions.